Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. So I used to think astrology was a whole lot of nonsense, but then I started noticing patterns, and when I did calculations on the probabilities of all these patterns happening by chance, they got lower and lower as I saw more and more events pop up. And depending on how you calculate it, I'll leave it as an exercise to the viewer. Some of these coincidences have 1 in millions, 1 in billions of chances of occurring, right? If you have a friend who tells you he has a secret of picking lottery numbers and he wins the lottery week after week after week, at some point you got to stop believing it's a coincidence, right? And that's what astrology has done for me over the last couple of years. I first noticed the pattern when Mars and Jupiter came into conjunction. It was March 19th of 2020. We all remember what we were doing at that time, right? I distinctly remember going out to view that conjunction because everything was closed down, right? My favorite food was no longer available at the store, no toilet paper, you couldn't go to work in the office anymore. Everything stopped, right? And even various YouTube channels that I like to watch, people couldn't film them in their regular locales, and so everything was broken in some way. But when I looked up in the sky, Mars and Jupiter still operated as if nothing had stopped. It was a beautiful thing. And so I distinctly remember that conjunction. Mars and Jupiter come into conjunction every 26 or so months, and I forgot to write down what date it happened in 2022, but it was around the time of the Russia war in Ukraine. So that's already 2 of them that we've seen. Now, July 4th, 2020 was a Saturday. I had been looking forward to that day even before the pandemic because I'm a big fan of the Chicago band, and I so badly wanted to sing Saturday in the Park on July 4th, 2020. I had been waiting years to do that. And also, we had a lunar eclipse on that day. And I don't think I need to tell you how bad the situation was back then. Maybe COVID was slowing down a little bit over the summer, but we had George Floyd and all that. During the pandemic, we had 5, and we're heading to our 6th one, Friday the 13th. And especially when Friday the 13th got combined with an event in the sky, like the first one was almost coincidental to Mars and Jupiter coming to conjunction. We had a lunar eclipse around the time of November 13. Every one of those we had big COVID spikes. Not the last one. January 13 we didn't have a COVID spike, but instead we had RSV and we had almost a pandemic level flu. Jupiter and Saturn come into conjunction roughly once every 20 years. And sometimes when they come into conjunction, because the Earth moves a whole lot faster than either Jupiter or Saturn, sometimes you can get 3 in a row, and that's when really bad things happen, right? So the last time this happened was in 1981. We had 3 conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn in close succession of one another on New Year's Day, on March 6th, and on July 25th. And March 6th is not that far from when Reagan was shot by John Hinckley Jr. The time before that, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then the time before that, we had all the bloody situations during World War II. Now, also in 2020, give me a second. Crap. Oh well. Also in 2020, Halloween happened to have a full moon. And around the time of Halloween 2020, obviously we had our second wave of COVID, and we had all the drama at the elections a couple days later, right? And then the time before that, see, every 19 years, the Earth goes around the sun 19 times, obviously, but also the moon goes around the Earth almost exactly 235 times. So if you go 19 years anniversaries, you'll have the same lunar phase every time. And the last time that happened was obviously Halloween of 2001, and I don't think I need to tell you what the nation was reeling over around that time. And then 19 years before that, 1982, I wasn't alive yet, but we had another terror attack. Somebody had put cyanide into Tylenol in Chicago, and 7 people died. That story kind of hit hard for me last year because it was the 40-year anniversary. And also last year, there were stories on the news of people slipping fentanyl into various products at the grocery store, candy for the most part, and that scared the crap out of me because I have an addictive personality, and I worry if I ever come into contact with fentanyl, it's probably game over for me. And so, and it was the 40-year anniversary of Tylenol as well, so I watched a couple documentaries that were, because the Tylenol murder is still unsolved, believe it or not. A lot of people I talked to thought it was solved, but they were probably thinking of copycats. I used to live in Seattle, and Seattle had 2 copycats of the Tylenol murders over the decade after Tylenol. And the story of the Tylenol hit me hard because of, like I said, I have addictive personality myself, and there was the first victim of the Tylenol murder was actually a 12-year-old girl, and then there was a family who had lost 3 family members in one day. What had happened was, so there was a postal worker who woke up with a cold. He took his daughter to daycare, and on the way home picked up a bottle of Tylenol and took one to lay down. Obviously never woke up again. His wife found him and took him to the hospital, and he died. And he was only 25 years old or so. And as the family gathered in his home to plan the funeral, obviously the family members were feeling ill from the events of the day. His brother and his wife took some Tylenol from the same bottle and also died. And I was in the documentary 40 years later. Now the surviving brother has grandchildren now, and his granddaughter actually wrote an essay about the Tylenol murder. So even 40 years later. And during the investigation, the FBI, one of the psychologists working for the FBI, came up with an idea of writing about the first murder victim, the 12-year-old girl, and how her mom could no longer have children because of something, and also about how protective her parents were because she was their only child, and how they could never imagine something like that, and how even a year later they still can't bear to go to her gravesite. They haven't opened their daughter's bedroom because of all the grief, and the hope was to entice the murderer, if you were reading that story on the news, to go to the gravesite, and they had set up surveillance and all that. Obviously, it didn't work. And so 40 years later, that murder is still unsolved. So it kind of hit me hard. Now, the time before 82, when we had a full moon on Halloween, was just after John F. Kennedy had been shot. The time before that was during World War II, and that was around the time that the first V-2 rockets were launched during the war. And 19 years before that, there was a parade for the KKK. Obviously, none of these are pleasant events. Now, what's really scary is next year, anytime 2 big planets come into conjunction, like Jupiter and Saturn, Jupiter and Neptune, we tend to have very bad events, right? And Jupiter and Uranus come back into conjunction on April 20th, 2024. Now, July 4th has a tendency to bring all sorts of bad luck, especially when you combine it with astrology. I forgot to write it down, but July 4th, 1917 also had a lunar eclipse, and not long after that there was the Spanish flu. Now, June 14th of next year will be exactly 1 Pluto year since July 4, 1776. It will be our first 4th of July on Pluto. Too bad we don't have any spacecraft up there to celebrate our first 4th of July. I think it would be too late to launch now. It usually takes, let's see, New Horizons took 9 years to go to Pluto, and before that we had Voyager 2, which took 12 years to get to Neptune. And that's only when the other planets are in the right place, right? Without Jupiter and Saturn being in the right place, it probably takes multiple decades to get up to Pluto. That's too bad. I'll probably take a good look at Pluto on that day just to celebrate. But this is really bad. I'll let you calculate what's the probability of all of these events. Halloween having a full moon, Jupiter and Saturn coming into conjunction, multiple Friday the 13th, some of them lining up with a lunar eclipse, Saturday in the park, right? I'll let you calculate the probability of all that. And tell me it's still a coincidence, right? Why don't you win the lottery by coincidence if you believe all of this is coincidence, right? This is the Peter Dislike Show! Bum, 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show! Bum, 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 bum.